Welcome back to our final part. In the break, we were all having a quite good chat there. I do want to talk to you, Muriel, about PAG and maybe free thinkers, because that's what you do. And you take great interest in things. You said you returned to the Isle of Man and you realised that it wasn't quite as you thought it should be for getting things done.
It was a bit like stepping back in time. A bit. I remember seeing an advert in the paper for like a 35-year-old woman to do a job, and I thought, you can't do that these days, because nobody in England would have thought of doing that. And then I found out that they didn't actually have the Equality Act in the Isle of Man. So that's been sort of progress that's come in.
Do you go to all the Tim Walls? How much do you follow the politics?
I did in the early days. I used to go occasionally just to see them. Yes, but now that it's on the radio, I sort of listen to the radio occasionally. Mm-hmm.
How do you rate them? Oh, is that too wide a brief? What's the standard like? Let's try that.
I'm disappointed that there aren't people who've got real fire in their belly who want to achieve something.
You got one in.
Yes, yeah. Well, there are half a dozen, I think, who do, but a lot of it, I don't know. There's very superficial debate, I think, about some topics, and I would just like to see somebody who wants to get in there and achieve something like poverty or housing. We've got all the problems of poverty, alcoholism, drug addiction, you name it. The Isle of Man, I think, used to think it was slightly different, and we didn't have all these things. It's like the human rights bill doesn't apply to the Isle of Man. But there is poverty on the island, and they toss it around from here to there, from one department to another, or onto Douglas Corporation or whatever. And there isn't a policy on housing, say. There's a big divide between social housing and private housing. We've seen that when they talk about the condition of housing. Turns out they don't actually know what the condition of the public houses is, because they don't sort of survey them. So to me, I would like to see big policies on, say, housing.
And you're big on climate change as well, is that not?
Yes, yeah, on the environment and energy. I think I was reading it in the Green Centre this morning. The government commissioned an external review in 2004 on energy efficiency in the Isle of Man. And that report sets out everything that they should be doing with recommendations, working with the Carbon Trust and setting up an advice centre, having a high-profile energy advisor and so on. And they're just beginning now to talk about climate change, 16 years later?
And it's all running out of time now, isn't it? It almost feels like we're at the end of this session now, and it's all going to be booted onto the next administration.
Yeah, yes.
Are you going to stand, by the way? Or you going to interest?
No. But we do need a young generation.
Could be an MLC, though. I can see you as an MLC. Don't you? I always say, Chris, you're quite an MLC in your sake, 'cause you're very detailed, aren't you?
I'm not
He's
an
got
MLC.
No, but you're a
fantastic memory.
Detailed man, though.
Yeah.
You do pick through things.
It's important to have the detail to understand the thing, but I completely agree with Muriel. What you need in a politician is you need to want to change something. To me, the question that people should be asking their MHK candidates over the summer, when the election were really hot up, is what is it you want to achieve in politics?
If you look at, we had a local election because of Bill Malarkey, and it's just motherhood and apple pie. If you read the manifestos, I want to do this and that, but there's no real energy there that I want to get in and do something.
Well, you have there's more women represented though.
Yes,
Christian getting in.
Yes, yeah,
and also to rank the candidates. I think the people who came third and fourth have told me this. They understand it, but with hindsight, if you read back Paul Quine and Claire Christian's manifestos compared to the other 8, they are slightly more. This is what we want to do, and so on and so on. So although you say you want everybody to be slightly higher or much higher, perhaps, Paul and Claire did deserve it in your terms. The way you go back.
He has a big manifesto which he brings Queensland every year for his interviews with me. You've done everything you need to do on that?
I'm quite pleased with the progress. I will report on that. I actually had the privilege of being invited to the Green Party conference just before, whenever it was, recently anyhow, October time, and we talked then about how the Green Party should actually try to capture what the government has achieved and hasn't achieved in terms of housing, energy efficiency, transport, all those really practical things that matter to people, and actually realistically assess what's happened over the last 4 years and then propose specific changes to what they need to happen, and that way we'll up the standard of elections. I just want to say something else in Muriel's, to compliment Muriel, because not just her, but the other 50 or 100 people who are a bit like Muriel around the island, because as an MHK who enjoys discussing these things, Muriel will use social media to correct you or to compliment you, and
she does that.
And also, if she's going to be really brutal or really kind, she'll do it in private by sending you an email. And there are lots of people like that around the island, and that's an important part of the political dynamic of the island, and we appreciate it, because any feedback is helpful feedback, whether it's negative or positive. It's still, it's
it seems to me like it's a really tough job, because it's like wading through treacle, isn't it? It must
Ask
be.
him, I don't know.
And the amount of time that anything takes to achieve.
Yeah.
It's how do you make more? How do you sort of get out to younger people to show a little bit more interest in politics? It's not really politics.
They'll come
life,
out for
more interest in
issues.
life.
I joined the young people yesterday. They were outside the government buildings on their climate action strike. There were about 20 of them there. But they will come out for single issues that they understand, and they came out for the Black Lives Matter. A lot of people came
Could it be
out
true
for
that
that.
if
But they don't come out for the Manx Labour Party or...
I'm just wondering, could it be true
Green
that if they
Party.
feel they've been ignored on issues, that they probably think there's absolutely no point? I felt ignored for years on this. I've certainly felt ignored as a taxi owner for 15, 16 years. But the difference is with me is I think there must be something kind of wrong up here, because the more I'm ignored, the more I have to fight back.
You're sort of asking why. Why
Should
is that
we touch on the taxi side of things? Because the Bus Vannin has crept into your domain over these years.
They are doing something, aren't
Well, they do.
about
They do.
Accessibility on.
Well, he knows the latest, because I don't know what the latest is. Is it still door to door for people in the north and in certain areas, and they can dial a bus up? What have I said here? Your face. Go on.
Well, no, I mean, Barry,
it's difficult, isn't it? It's a complicated subject to start. Like for most people, taxis and buses are just something that literally it's bus drivers driving a bus around because they've got nothing better to do, or it's taxi drivers driving a taxi around because they've got nothing better to do. But at the end of the day, bus drivers, taxis, it's an industry that probably employs the back end of 1,000 people, 800 people, big, huge industry. In a little island population of, what we got, 85,000, of which 25,000 of them are moving around. So, it's a little apple for a lot of people trying to bite at it. So the transport industry isn't something that needs to be taken lightly. It shouldn't ever be a case of the general public's just thinking, bloody taxi drivers blocking up the road, bloody taxi drivers stop where they want, they do this, they do that, they do the other. Most of the time, the taxi driver has to stop where the passenger wants to start with. So that's but getting off. The transport industry is a serious industry,
and it should be part of a transport policy, shouldn't it?
It should be. It should be up there as well. It doesn't have to be up there all of the time, but for my 15 years, 16 years experience in the industry, it's largely, I believe, a forgotten about industry at the private sector, whereas I believe that the public sector side of it is never away from the Queen's.
The proof of that is in 2001 there was a Road Transport Act with a schedule that's got transitional provisions, and we're still operating under the transitional provisions from 2001. And then in education, we're told we need a new education and so on and so on. But so there's a part in there where you've got to assess the need for apply for hire, private hire, and all of that sort of stuff. And as Muriel suggested, we need an actual Isle of Man transport strategy for on-island travel, which involves taxis, buses, active travel, cars, parking, and all of the other things.
It's not going to happen anytime soon, is it?
It has to happen. It has to happen.
Anytime soon?
It has to happen. It had to happen in actual fact before the area plan for the East, which zoned and planned the largest part of the island where people move to and where people live and where people work. It had to happen before that. It hasn't. It now needs to happen urgently, and I'm very disappointed with an answer I got in the last few weeks, as was Laurie Hooper, which is that basically the transport policy is being developed, but it only covers buses and trains, which is the things that the Department of Infrastructure...
cycling is out on its own somewhere doing
taxis is
doing
too
its own
difficult
thing.
because you have to deal with Barry Murphy.
I remember when
the
when the hospital was first relocated, and for some reason I got in touch. I think it was with David Cretney, to say that there didn't seem to be many buses going up to the hospital. And I was told they hadn't been allocated any money to provide buses for a new hospital that was out of the centre of Douglas. Well, I mean, that's not planning, is it?
In 1998, Douglas Transport Plan, the fact that the hospital was there, it assumed there would be a new road that we were going past the hospital and then onwards to Peel that people would use, because it doesn't really make sense to have a hospital that you can't get to very easily.
No.
There seems to be a lot of buses, but like it just seems to me, yet again, I'm a night worker, so when I'm out working, there's not really many buses at all. But what I do seem to take 2020 out of the mold, but like so go pre-2020. There's a lot of buses going down very few routes, and there's very few buses covering large parts of the island. I had a lady contact me last night, and she was wanting to get a friend of hers from Ramsey to Andreas, which is that area is one of the problematic areas to get a bus, because this is where this crazy idea of a dial-a-ride comes into the mole. So instead of having a bus service maybe even 1 an hour, which I guess would just a regular bus route going
a crazy idea, dial-a-ride. This was I was trying to get to.
I know you are.
I know. Well, now we finally got there.
But you see, Paul, you have to remember, right? So you're looking at 15 years of ignorance, or 15 years of neglect, or whatever you want to call it, and you're trying to jam something into 20 minutes. You're never going to get a straightforward man off the street answer off me to any of this. If I can't answer it exact, I ain't going to answer it. So all I can do is touch on a few things and have them exact. The first problem you have with transport is simply this. You've got a government department, DOI, operating buses, and then you've got the private sector operating taxis and a few buses, namely Tours Isle of Man. You've got, and it's the same problem you've got with gas. You've got government regulating government. With transport, you've got government regulating government, and you've also got government regulating the private sector. And it just seems all the time that the government regulating the government, when it comes to buses, get a much better deal. This year, you've only got to look at it. Bus Vannin came under emergency powers. The Section 25, Royal Transport Act,
wasn't in place.
In effect, I took it. Don't take this from a legal statement, but if Section 25 of the Royal Transport Act no longer applies to Bus Vannin, that to me tells me that they're running without a licence. They've got no regulator, they've got no licence. If it doesn't apply to them, they have no licence.
Can you remind me what it said? They could just do what they wanted to do something.
So basically, with route changes and things like that, the RTLC is no longer involved in approving the process.
They can do whatever they want.
So essentially, it was presented to Tynwald members as helping us to get health workers to the hospital and so on, but it became much more.
But of course, it's Bus Vannin saying they can do it. To me,
is that altered forever, or is it a sunset clause now?
December 26th. December 26th, it'll cease to be the case because the emergency comes to an end under the continuation regulations, and that's why I've got much more involved in it, because it's not fair to have an unlevel playing field between the different sectors.
You're blinking your eyes, but that's the bit you need to get to. So to answer your question, we need to get to there. So because when you're talking about dial-a-ride and you're talking about Bus Vannin, at the minute you can't really challenge any of it because the DOI, Bus Vannin, are still under emergency powers. So at the end of the 25th, we're back in the arena. We can start having a few verbal digs at them again. So when it comes to the
not me, I'm a balanced in the middle of the road politician. I want fairness. I want a level playing field. I want proper regulation applied equally across the police. I want proper terms and conditions for everybody. I mean, if by chance it's become a massive gig economy driving people around, it's unsafe for all sorts of reasons. That can't be right. That's a bit like I linked it to the post office. We're perhaps in that sort of situation. So the Isle of Man government's got got to have the guts to actually treat everybody fairly. At the moment, it's tended to actually look after itself
Favour themselves.
I didn't know this. I mean, maybe it hasn't had enough
Look,
thing.
I mean, that data, right? This is Hansard. This is taken straight from the Tynwald website. And unfortunately, the printer got jammed this morning. So I have
There's so much of it.
You only had 3 hours sleep. And you're
I feel so guilty bring you out.
I'm going to go back on all of this. But I always get this wrong. The Policy Infrastructure Reform Committee. Is that right?
Policy Review Committee.
Policy Review Committee. They met me and 4 other private sector transport operators, taxi and bus. One poor gentleman, RIP, no longer with us, Mr. Lightfoot, that had Tours Isle of Man, went to see this committee back Wednesday the 15th of May 2019. And that was a 2-way discussion with the committee. Rob Callister was the chair, Robert Shaw, Claire Barber, and I think that was it, actually. There might have been one more. And that was, there was 2 objectives there. The first objective was, what is the current position, place, and the necessity of the RTLC, and how does it work around transport? And the second part of that was really to do with dial-a-ride. So it was 2019. COVID wasn't even thought about. It was a good discussion on a very good day. And believe you me, I put weeks and weeks and weeks of work in to prepare for this. You know, literally, Paul, I don't turn up here unless I'm prepared. I set up this morning till 7 or 8 o'clock preparing for this. There's no point in me half doing this. So people think what they like of me, but that's the way I am. But I went down there to that, and I swear to you that since the 15th of May 2019, absolutely nothing has happened with that. I can't even find that. Apart from this bit of Hansard, I can no longer find anything to do with that on the Tynwald website anymore. I guess now it's been shuffled off down to the library. So now we have a which I'm not going to comment much on because I can't. I'll tell you the reason why. The OFT is currently investigating whether or not Bus Vannin, DOI, with regards to that dial-a-ride bus service is operating to some extent unfairly against the private sector. Don't ask me how. Again, I'm the major part of that. I just end up in these situations, but you know what?
You can't help yourself.
But that's because because what's going to happen at the 26th of December, I guess, once the DOI Bus Vannin come out of emergency powers, then this can then progress. At the minute, they're pretty much free to do whatever they want, and they pretty much do. We could then going to move on to that. But to me, the whole thing is just like a snowball. It just rolls and rolls and rolls and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Anything to do with this OFT investigation could have been sorted out by this committee and should have been sorted out by this committee. You know, I like Chris Robert Shaw. I've had some dealings with Chris over time, mostly again to do with taxis and buses. And over time, I've come to like Rob Callister because he showed quite a lot of interest in the gas. It's purely professional. There's no personal friendship whatsoever. But all I want, and all the majority of people want in the private sector transport industry, is fairness. You talk about fairness, that's all I want. And I don't want to be shoved from pillar to post continuously looking to get somebody just to understand what the issues are. I mean, the printer got stuck, and in here I think we should have had 25 pages. And this was just one part. Okay. It's a huge, huge, huge story.
Politician-wise, is this a mess? Am I saying something that we shouldn't be even?
No, it needs sorting. For a long time in the Isle of Man, we haven't had proper fair trading competition law. We've got a competition bill in the House of Keys, and we will have that. But there's 3 other points that Barry would also agree with. One is this is about the livelihood for taxi drivers, for the people who are not haven't bought their plates, and also provide a service. It's about the livelihood for bus drivers, but also it's about young people, how they get home safely from when they're out. It's also about how we adapt transport on the island for climate change, which is Muriel's big interest. It's also about providing fair, reasonable access for disabled people and all of those sorts of issues.
And how we can afford to do this if we're being grounded into the financial...
So it's massively complicated.
By the government.
Massively complicated, but I completely 100% agree with Barry and the other people involved that we've got to make progress on that. That is why I mentioned the 2001 Act and the open questions.
So just simply, these emergency powers, but they were too long, weren't they, to go up to 26th of December? I mean,
it was me. I can't. I've got to take some blame for that because in June I moved that the emergency came to an end, and the Chief Minister and the Council Ministers, as they always do, wanted to take credit for everything. So they moved. They immediately said it was all going to be their idea, and they immediately jumped in and ended the emergency. So I wouldn't have, and I never moved my.
So you are to blame.
No, just because I excited. You can't be in my humble opinion, we never needed to use the emergency powers legislation. The Attorney General wrote a letter on May the 27th, which says that, the way I read it, it says the exact opposite the way the Chief Minister reads it. But basically, because we did all these other things like change the way Bus Vannin is regulated, because we changed the date of the local elections and and lots of other things, we needed to use emergency powers. For the public health part of it, we didn't. Very importantly, in December, we are putting the whole of the public health regime, the contact tracing, the testing, the surveillance, and all of that into a framework under the Public Health Act. The real legal animals in Legislative Council, people like Kate Lord-Brennan, Tanya August-Hanson, Jane Paul Wilson, who really take their job seriously as legislative reviewers, and the MLCs are all over this last few weeks. Some of us backbenchers have also had time to look at it as well. And so in that sense, I have to go back and say, perhaps Chris was right. Perhaps we could have used the Public Health Act to deal with this all along, not the Emergency Powers Act. But anyhow, the first question you asked Barry a while back was about young people and their involvement, and Barry made a coherent case, which is that perhaps we weren't addressing the issues that young people care about.
I have one thing on that, only one, and to me, it's going to sound ridiculous, and you're probably not going to agree, but this is the way I think. When Summerland got taken down 17, 18, 19 years ago.
Yeah.
It wasn't great. I worked in the cave. I was a barman in the cave, and I had some really good times when I was young and fitter than I am right now. But you know what? It was a good building. It was all right in there, and I know that bad history there as well. But it was at the time it was a good place to go. When the government decided we're going to pull that building down, they promised they were going to put something else on that site that would to replace it. That was not going to be bigger, but was going to be more convenient and better, and something for the public, for younger people to go to. It was a way to sell the demolition. Something along the lines of the wave. Am I right?
Yes,
the wave
yes,
was an idea of the wave came along, and then the
David,
wave was going to come up, and I think it was a building on stilts or whatever it had to be to stop the.
It was separated from the cliff face, and they had a wind turbine.
Nothing happened.
Well, you see, and this is what's
that
wrong.
Was David
This is precisely what's wrong.
That's years ago.
It just seems anything that young people, anything that might be fun for young people, just gets pushed away.
There's an ice rink at the minute. Sorry.
Young people
but it's temporary, isn't it?
Young people care about the same things as older people do as well. And to go back to another issue that excites Muriel and me, and I think probably you as well, Barry, housing. You know, in politics we tend to still argue about public sector houses versus private housing and registers. But what really matters, my son was explaining to me in housing at the moment, is can you look somebody in the eye who's 21 or 22 and say, this is how you save 40,000 for your deposit on your house, or you shouldn't be trying to save for a deposit on a house, you should be actually thinking about renting throughout your life or whatever. So we should be addressing younger people's housing issues. At the moment we give 10 or 11 people a year some sort of help or something like that. That's not the real point. The real point is creating savings products for young people, in fact like they've got across, actually thinking about affordable housing working between the private sector and the public sector. We need to be much more dynamic, and then I think we'd excite politics because we're addressing issues that matter to them.
Okay, well,
and I agree with Barry. Entertainment.
You've got to reach out to young people. I mean, they're the future. It's funny. I've deliberately been trying to do a little bit of a taxi survey on this. I must appear like the weird taxi driver because I asked sort of young people between the ages of 18 to 25 a straightforward question: do you have any interest in politics? Nah.
No. What strikes me is that I think the young people, they weren't clamouring to have the vote at 16, but they were given the vote at 16. Yeah. But the government as such has done very little to educate them on how politics works. And
get them to come out to vote is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Anyway, listen.
My little boy wants me to take him to the House of Keys or to Timwell one day. He's actually, because my little girl, funny, here's a cracker before I come out the door. I went earlier on before I took the tie off. But my little girl met me at the door. Right, she's stood by the door waiting for me to go out, and she says, "Hey, Daddy, do you work for Manx Gas? Go and ask your mummy. But which she did. But my little boy is actually, because since I got involved in the whole in the whole sort of gas thing, and I sort of insistently tried to get my little kids to sit down, and there's your daddy sat on YouTube, because you know what, listen, I am a little bit, I'm not scared to admit, I'm a little bit kind of, at least kind of happy that I done what I did, albeit possibly unpopular to some people and more popular to somebody else, I don't know. But my little boy, talking about politics, this is the key what I want to get to, he wants me to take him to the Keys or to Tynwald. He wants me to do that, but he's at school. So maybe when I go back today and I speak to Caroline, I might say to her, why don't you speak to the school and ask whether or not one day I can take my little boy out of school? Because you see, that's the thing, the state really controls the kids. They have control. When the kids are at school, I can't go and say, I want to take my kid out to go.
Well, maybe we'll get live feeds from Tynwald and Huskies one day. I'm working on it. This is before we finish. You're not going to stand, but you're very interested in politics. You're going to re-stand, aren't you?
Yes.
And... well, come on. I mean, you seem to have really grabbed the whole thing. Well, you say that, but I bet you're getting a few people thinking you might want to do it.
I don't know.
You don't?
I don't know.
That's not a no, was it?
I'll never give you a no. I don't know. Look, I wouldn't even know how to go about doing it. Can you help me with the campaign?
No. Don't ask him. Rule number one from Paul Moulton is to go and knock on a few doors. Paul tried to do it all by himself.
I did it all by myself. What a waste of time that was.
I can't even get my printer to work, Paul.
I haven't got a printer that works either. Listen, thank you so much, panel. Been very interesting indeed. And thank you very much for coming
Thank
in.
you for providing this public service.
My public service broadcasting thing. And if anyone wants to sponsor this programme, please feel free to get in touch. We're getting near the end of my year.
Manx Gas or might be interesting.
Can you imagine that? I don't know. Anyway, thanks again, and we'll have another weekend debate. Oh, next week, as far as I'm aware, we're going to have Mark O'Connor presenting it. I'll be making sure it's all happening, but it's nice to have somebody else in this chair to give a different perspective.
What about Alan Bell, getting former Chief Minister's?
Well, he was on our list, in fact. He just couldn't show this week, but he's definitely coming in the new year, he promises me.
Very good, thank you very much.
Nicely put in there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Please like and subscribe to the Isle of Man TV channel. Thank you.